Hello, everyone, and a sincere welcome to the restored Roadside Relics edition of Beyond the Boneyard, the latest in a series of special programs brought to you by the Neon Museum in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm Bruce Spottelson, and I'm the Neon Museum's acting executive director. You may not be able to see each other, but we have a large audience with us for this program. My colleagues and I hope you're well, and we thank you all for joining us for this presentation. As most of you know, the best known pieces in our collection are on display at the Neon Boneyard, including almost all of our larger exhibits. But in this presentation of Beyond the Boneyard, our staff is sharing a look at some truly stunning pieces that are well away from our campus. In this segment, we're going to talk about the 9 signs we've restored and placed in an array of downtown Las Vegas locations, signs that anyone can enjoy 24/7, just like our famous city. And signs that are actually part of a National Scenic Byway along Las Vegas Boulevard. Our program will probably spark a few questions. Please use the Q&A box on your screen to submit any you may have, and we'll address them at the conclusion of our show. We hope you enjoy these presentations. If you do, maybe you'll consider becoming one of our very special members. Our members come from near and far, united by memories of Las Vegas and their affection for our collection. And if you don't feel a membership is right for you, please consider a contribution to our annual fund. It will be valued and appreciated. Of course, we thank you if you already have supported us. These have been challenging times for people and museums alike, and we're grateful that you've placed your trust in us. Now, it's time to introduce 2 professionals I'm proud to be associated with, my colleagues Derek Weiss and Emily Felmer. Derek is the Neon Museum's Education and Engagement Manager, and he works with the rest of our team to arrange critical initiatives and educational programs. Emily is our collections specialist, a role in which she oversees the collection, its acquisitions, and the care initiatives so important to preservation. A reminder, again, that as you develop questions, we ask that you please use the Q&A box on your screen to submit them for discussion after the program. And although this program was produced live, it will be available for viewing later. We thank you again for joining us. And now it's time to turn the screen over to Derek and Emily. Please enjoy our presentation.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Derek, as Bruce mentioned, here with Emily, and we are going to highlight the 9 historic signs that the museum has restored and installed throughout downtown. As Bruce mentioned, many of them are part of the National Scenic Byway. That is the stretch of Las Vegas Boulevard that goes from Washington Avenue down south to Sahara. And then we have a couple others that aren't part of the byway that we'll include in our presentation as well. And this has been an ongoing partnership with the City of Las Vegas, as well as the Regional Transportation Commission, the RTC. And you all know, if you've been to the museum or not, Las Vegas is known for neon, right? And it's been our mission to preserve and display them. And this really goes back to how the museum started. So early on, when it was first founded in the 1990s, putting signs out for the public to enjoy was really what we were first doing initially. And we'll touch more on that as we go along here. Do you have anything to add, Emily, before we get into our little map here on the next slide?
I think I'm good for now.
Okay. Yeah, we'll probably do a little banter back and forth here and there. So this just kind of shows you, this is actually from our rack card that gives you a little guide to these signs, and you can find the full thing on our website. But this shows you kind of the route we're going to take, so to speak. So showing the 9 signs and the 9 locations. And the first one that we'll start with is a piece installed in the center median at Washington and Las Vegas Boulevard, just north of the museum, and it is from Binion's Horseshoe.
Yeah, so Binion's Horseshoe opened up in 1951 at 128 Fremont Street. Benny Binion, who purchased this or opened this property. He was originally from Texas. He had some issues with the law over the years. First, he was convicted or tried for 2 murders. He was convicted of 1, did not serve any time in jail for it. But later in his career, he did end up going to jail for tax evasion. But we'll, that aside, he did revolutionize a lot of the things we do know today in Las Vegas, such as the comp systems, as well as kind of making the smaller gamblers feel like the bigger ones by comping free drinks. But he did revolutionize neon downtown as well. In 1962, on the next slide, we'll see a rendering of what the design was for the building. Architects William McAllister and William Wagner worked very hard with the YESCO powerhouse team of the early 1960s, which included designers Jack Larson, Kermit Wayne, Herman Bernge, and Ben Mitchum. Around this time, many other properties down on Fremont Street, such as the Golden Nugget, also began to wrap their buildings with neon. This became known as the decorated shed look that you can still see on a few properties downtown today. But as you see here, a few of these signs you may recognize from the Neon Museum's Boneyard, including the H wall, as well as many of the horseshoe letters. On the next slide, we have a daytime and nighttime image, both from either the late, the one on the, I'm sorry, the one on the left is from 1972. The one on the right is from the late 60s. During the daytime and nighttime, though, you'll see many properties have bright colors, both during the day and at nighttime on their signs to really draw in their customers. Many colors such as red and yellow were commonly used on painted onto the signs to kind of draw your attention when the lights are not on. This became known as daytime neon. So throughout the presentation, you'll see a lot of the signs do use really bright colors for that effect. The next slide, please. Here you'll also see our portion of the sign that's on the Scenic Byway, that one right above the hotel portion. That one used to rotate, actually, very interestingly. Some of these signs you'll see were reincorporated into the property later on when they redesigned it, when Binion's Horseshoe changed to the name just Binion's. Next slide, please. On many of our signs in the collection, as well as on some on the byway, you'll see that there are maintenance rungs on the perimeter of the signs. Those are usually to climb up for maintenance workers to either change the light bulbs or to repaint the signs. We did recently publish a blog post about sign maintainers. This will tie in nicely with an oral history project we have coming up with a few sign workers from Las Vegas. The next slide, please. So as I briefly mentioned earlier, Binion's Horseshoe transitioned into Binion's in the early 2000s. At this time, they did incorporate a lot of that original 1962 design into the building, but they did change the font to be more of a cursive script. And recently, about a year and a half ago, the museum was fortunate to retrieve or receive the Binion's B and oval shaped sign you see on the right there. These were located on the corner of 3rd Street and Fremont. They were doing a renovation project, so they had to take the signs down. And now they are currently in our Boulevard Gallery. Hopefully someday we can do a Beyond the Boneyard Boulevard Gallery edition. Next slide, please. Thank you.
All right, well, going away from Binion's Horseshoe, if you're just traveling down Las Vegas Boulevard, right across the street from the Neon Museum's main campus and the former lobby of the La Concha Motel that's now the visitor center, is the Silver Slipper. And the Silver Slipper started operations on the Las Vegas Strip in 1950. It was the last frontier village. It was originally the Golden Slipper, and then shortly after that changed names to the Silver Slipper. If we want to go to the next slide, we'll see here, this is a photo that Vintage Las Vegas shared a while back. The slipper itself, the sign, dates to the mid 1950s. It was designed by Jack Larson Sr. with Yesco, Young Electric Sign Company. And you can see there that it was on the building itself originally. Later on, it was moved to be part of the roadside sign. So the Silver Slipper was this kind of Old West saloon style place. You'll see the Slipper sign itself in this photo at the time had a blue, silver, and gold color scheme. It did change a few different times over the years, which we'll see a little bit later. Now, if we want to go to the next slide, see another shot from the 1950s showing the Slipper there. Now, around the same time when the Slipper was new, or maybe a little bit before, the Silver Slipper actually was the site of a Black History Month meeting that the NAACP put on. And you may think to yourself, well, that was probably fairly unusual, and you'd be right. It was extremely hard to organize such a thing at the time, since all the casinos and hotels on the Las Vegas Strip were segregated. And this is a little story that we've shared off and on over the years, was developed and researched by historian Dorothy Wright, who was also one of our former board members for Black History Month. And it looks like this story really is based on the recollections of Lubertha Johnson, who was a local civil rights leader and was one of the people who organized this program at the Silver Slipper in the 50s. And according to Lubertha Johnson, they had approached the Silver Slipper to see if they had space, but they happened to already know somebody who worked there, and that was Bill Willard. He was an entertainment columnist for the Las Vegas Sun, and he did work at the Silver Slipper for a while, working in some of the shows and some of the burlesque productions. Now, we really don't have much in our collection in terms of photographs or any ephemera from a lot of those shows. But we do have some items from a later show, if we want to skip to the next slide. And this is kind of fast forwarding to the 1970s and 1980s for a moment. One of the more famous shows that was ever at the Silver Slipper was Boylesque, featuring Kenny Kerr. And you can see this photograph we have from, I think, 1984. You can see Kenny Kerr's Boylesque offering showtimes 8, 10, and 12 for $6.95. This started in 1977, had its debut in May of that year. Kerr himself really kind of set a new standard for female impersonation shows here in Las Vegas with this. He dressed up and performed as Mr. Barbara Streisand and Mr. Diana Ross, among others. And according to historian Dennis McBride, Kerr did become, in his later years, really a big advocate and a leading voice in the gay community in Las Vegas. Although at the time when the Boylesque was new and he was making a name for himself, he was initially fairly reluctant to be out in the open as a gay person, understandably so at the time. But he did later, as I said, become a real voice for the gay community and was involved in a lot of different charitable causes as well, including AFAN, notably, which is Aid for AIDS of Nevada. You also see on the screen there a couple of the smaller ephemera items we have in the collection, 2 ticket stubs from Boylesque 81 there. So we don't just collect the signs, but we do have other artifacts that help flesh out the stories as well. We want to go to the next slide.
Yes.
Just real quick, I'll mention something before I turn it back over to Emily. It's kind of one of those things that always comes up about the Silver Slipper, and it's the stories of the Silver Slipper and Howard Hughes. And you may have heard these before. There's different variations of them, but as interesting as they are, they're probably not quite true. So just to mention real quick, Howard Hughes did in fact purchase the Silver Slipper in 1968, but it was really just part of his overall buying spree that he was, buying up several different Las Vegas casinos at that time. Some of the stories you will often hear, though, and they still circulate, still hear them from time to time from visitors and online. One was that Howard Hughes, being across the street at the Desert Inn and in his room up in the top floor, where he was in kind of self-imposed isolation, did not like the Silver Slipper shining and bothering him across the street, so he bought it and had it turned off. Well, that's not quite the case, because a few people have pointed this out, that, well, his windows would have been blacked out, since that's how he had it set up. Also, I've heard that he wasn't even on that side of the building, wouldn't have had that great of a view. And you got to think too, well, number one, the slipper did stay on. It was in use up until the late 80s. And also the Frontier sign right nearby was much larger and much brighter. Now, another variation of the story involves Hughes buying the Silver Slipper because he thought that there was a surveillance camera inside of the shoe, so that the government or others could spy on him. And thus he purchased it, had it shut off, and then also filled it with concrete. Not quite true. We don't think. We have the sign and have seen no real evidence of a camera being in it, nor is there evidence of concrete ever being in there. So those are some compelling stories that you often hear and they get talked about, but they really belong more in the realm of myth and legend rather than actual historical fact. I mentioned a second ago that the slipper did have some cosmetic changes to it over the years. And I think, Emily, if you want to touch on that.
Oh, yes. So we saw those photos earlier from the 50s and early 60s of the blue and gold coloring on the shoe. In the 1970s, there actually was a large storm in Las Vegas, and the sign unfortunately fell down, and it did have some restoration work done to it. We speculate that may be when they did transition some of the colors on the piece as well. In this photograph, we see that the bottom of the shoe is silver, and the top part in the sole of the shoe is red. On the next slide, we'll see the sign in the Young Electric Sign Company's Boneyard after the sign was taken down. This sign was in storage here for a few years before the museum acquired it. Next slide, please. And then when the sign was put on the Scenic Byway originally, it did still have that red coloring, but in recent years, there was a push to move the sign to have its original colors again, of the blue on the sole of the shoe and on the bottom with the gold bow. So this is what the sign looks like currently today in front of the museum. And then next slide, please. Also, the shoe, it became such a trademark for the property that it also was on all of its ephemera objects almost. And this specific type of style of the shoe, the kind of thin heel and the tall arch in there, was used on the matchbooks, as well as some napkins that we have here, as well as those boyless tickets you saw earlier. Those also had that same shoe design on it. Next slide, please.
All right, well, I'll chime in here for a second. If you just go down Las Vegas Boulevard a short distance away from the Silver Slipper, you run into the Bow and Arrow Motel sign. This is a fine example of a mid-century sign with a simple animation that shows the bow and arrow firing. And we have a short little clip on the next slide that kind of shows it in action. This was taken pretty recently. And this sign perhaps dates, we don't have an exact year, perhaps dates to the late 1950s or early 1960s. And the neon in the center with that cutout is viewable from both sides. And we do know the motel was in business by at least 1959, if not before. But there are really, as far as we know, and as far as we've seen, I should say, really few images that we know of it in its original spot. And this is one that was shared online a while back. You can see on one side the Bow and Arrow Motel sign there. It's from 1963, thereabouts. And this was originally located on Wyoming Avenue and Las Vegas Boulevard. So if you're familiar with that stretch of Las Vegas Boulevard, it would be near where Dino's Bar is today. If you're familiar with that place, it's kind of a no-frills neighborhood hangout known for their karaoke. In the center of that photograph, you can see a sign that says Liquors. That was Ringside Liquors, which later became the site of Dino's. If we want to go to the next slide, I'll kind of introduce this, and Emily, if you want to jump in. For a while, the Bow and Arrow Motel sign was credited to designer Betty Willis of Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas fame. She also, of course, designed signs for the Blue Angel and the Moulin Rouge. However, a while back, we did locate some correspondence with her in which she indicated that she did not design the Bow and Arrow Motel sign. But we do have one that we can kind of compare it to that we know that she did do, which is Del Mar here. If you want to explain a little more, Emily.
Yeah, on the open cabin portion of the sign, there are many strokes of neon throughout there, kind of to look like waves. That is very similar to the design on the Bow and Arrow, that you could see that from each direction. And they did not have to make two sets of neon. If it was a double-sided sign, they'd have to make two sets, which kind of makes it more expensive in some situations. And this sign currently is in storage in our Boulevard Gallery as well. Same with the Binion signs we saw a little earlier in the presentation. Next, we're coming to Society Cleaners, which opened up in 1946 on 11th and Fremont Street. The Society Cleaner sign dates back to the opening of the property. They usually did contain the top hat and cane in their imagery for the property, including this sign, as well as some neon we'll see in a moment. This property was owned by the Gamet family for almost 60 years. And when the property closed, the sign was donated to the museum in 2006. Next slide, please. Here we have a photograph of the sign in situ or in place. It was kind of like a flag style sign. We don't actually have too many of these in the collection compared to some of the other ones. Next slide, please. The skeletal neon here on the building also does contain that top hat and cane design. Next slide, please. Here's the building, still standing today, actually. This is one of those cases of the earlier kind of buildings in Las Vegas still being around. We do recommend going by to see it, since if you do kind of go close enough to the building, you could maybe see where the signs used to be attached to the building. And right across the street, there's Ferguson's, which also has a great neon sign as well. And next, we're coming up to Normandy Motel. This little motel opened up in 1937 on what was called 5th Street back then, that eventually turned into Las Vegas Boulevard. This was claimed as one of the first motor courts really in Las Vegas, especially with expansion of the highways and car travels. Motels really were thriving on Las Vegas Boulevard back then, since it was a part of Highway 91, which was the predecessor to the I-15. So it would link us to Los Angeles as well as Salt Lake City. Next slide, please. The museum in 2000, when the property closed, was lucky to acquire the sign. This piece nowadays has the Elvis Slept Here still on the reader board. It is on both sides currently, but if you go to the next slide, we'll see that that the other side of the reader board kind of jokingly said highly recommended by owner. This sign, though, it's due to how big it is, as well as the weight, it had to be broken up to be moved, and it was dismantled. As you can see on the left, there's a blowtorch. The sign maintainer or sign worker is taking apart the sign for transportation. In the next slide, we'll see that some of the parts that they broke it up into. Derek had a great little message earlier about the Graceland Wedding Chapel in the background. If you want to touch upon that.
Oh, well, yeah, you can see the wedding chapel behind there at Graceland. That's an area of Las Vegas Boulevard that was at one point filled with a lot of motels and wedding chapels and other businesses that use neon. And now it's really, sadly, kind of becoming devoid of that. And this was located on Las Vegas Boulevard near Garces, kind of. If you're familiar with the Pawn Stars pawn shop and Pawn Plaza, it was almost right across the street there. And today, I believe, the site is now used as a parking lot. But the sign itself is like a giant battle axe. You can see the top part there. This one, Emily, right? We've seen it's been credited, I think, even in the past by the museum as being one of Betty Willis's designs as well. But we're not 100% sure about that. It could be from the 50s or it could be from a little earlier. We need to do a little more digging on that one.
And then here we have an image of them dismantling the reader board. This type of reader board is actually pretty different than some of the other ones we have in our collection. Usually the reader board has a long back plexiglass or fiberglass backing with Texas track over it, which is that silver track there. Either letters can be the letters could be attached on by little hooks, which these ones are, or there are plexiglass clearish letters that have either red or black font that pop inside of the track. Those are more similar to like movie theater old marquees. But yes, the next slide, please. Here we have another image of how they broke up the sign. Also, due to how tall the sign is, a lot of pieces have to be put on their side for transportation. Also, that's to go underneath bridges and that type of thing. The museum is close to one, so we have to be careful always when we move things nearby that. So, awesome. So the Lucky Cuss Motel sign is our next one. This sign actually is not currently installed on the byway. It was taken down for construction in the area, but be posted onto our social media channels for when it will return. We can go to the next slide. Since the Lucky Cuss Motel actually was the Panorama Motel originally, which opened in 1955 on East Fremont. Here we'll see that there was a cartoonish kind of font on the sign, as well as that squared open cabinetry on the left portion of the sign was also reincorporated into the Lucky Cuss Motel sign later on. In the next slide here, we'll see that at one point, the sign was blue and red, similar to the Silver Slipper sign that changed its colors over the years. A lot of companies in Vegas decide to change the colors on their signs. And maybe give it a little facelift. On the next slide, you'll see the coloring that currently is on the sign and was most recent to when the sign was taken down. But the Lucky Cuss Motel actually is still open on Fremont. They still use a similar font on their sign, but it's just not quite as big as a sign as this one was or is. Next, oh, thank you. So what's interesting is a lot of our signs have been used in movies or just in the backgrounds of shots of TV shows, such as the show Vegas. But even there are books that are set in Las Vegas, as well as some comics, such as this Zippy comic by Bill Griffith from 2007. You'll see the Lucky Cuss Motel is featured on the second panel of the comic strip. Also shown is the Holiday Motel sign, which the museum also does have in our collection. It's currently in storage as well. Hopefully we'll be able to have plans for that in the near future.
All right, well, traveled down Las Vegas Boulevard now to reach the intersection of Las Vegas Boulevard and Fremont Street. That's where this sign is located today. This is the sign from the Hacienda, which of course is now where Mandalay Bay is on the Strip. This we call the Hacienda Horse and Rider. It dates to the mid-1960s and was designed by Yesco's Brian Buzz Lemming at that time. And he was a very prolific sign designer, did a lot of things over the years. This is the very first sign to be officially part of the Neon Museum. In 1996 is when this first was restored and installed, and it's there today. We'll talk a little bit more and see some items from that in just a second. If we want to go to the next slide, we'll see a photograph showing the sign in its original context there during the day. And that, not sure the year on that, it's either like, might be the 70s. And we have another one if we head the next slide, the nighttime look. And we go on to the next slide. You have, just one quick comment. Wanted to say the Hacienda sign was the first to be installed in 1996, as you can see, and I'll let Emily talk in a sec. It didn't last long, but for a while it was the only thing that was part of the Neon Museum. So had you come to see the Neon Museum, that was pretty much it. But in subsequent years, they added a lot downtown in that area, the Fremont Street area. And this is some cool stuff that really, I didn't even really know we had until recently that Emily can tell you more about.
Yeah, so we do have our institutional archives here, which contain either documents from the formative years of the museum or ephemera items that were saved from events or openings such as this one. We have an invitation from November 13th, 1996 on the left, that bright pink and green coloring on the invitation kind of shows that in the earlier days of the museum, they took the neon theming very literally with the marketing, but it's very bright in real life also. I like the saying on the cover of the invitation. It says, most parties get more interesting when the lights go out. Kind of meaning that, yeah, the lights went out though for the Hacienda, but the lights came back downtown to begin with the Neon Museum. And Mayor Jan Jones, she was the mayor at the time. She was presenting awards at this ceremony, as well as there was jugglers, and they even had Fremont Street kind of closed down for the viewing of this. What's interesting also is on the bottom of the invitation for the attire, it says dress warmly. So it must have been a cold November that year in 1996. Also, we have a shirt that was from the ceremony as well. That also showcases our lovely Hacienda Horse and Rider. Next slide, please. Oh yes, so here we have one of our liquor bottles that's a part of the Joe Coffner collection. He actually created these in 1974. It's a part of a series of about 6 different bottles, all containing imagery from different Las Vegas properties. This one's only about 6 inches tall. They're actually a lot smaller than the photo kind of shows. But what's interesting is a lot of these in our collection do still have the IRS stamp on them to sell the alcohol that was once in them. And there are whiskey stickers on them as well. I think it was 86 proof. But we'll see another one from that collection later on in the presentation. Also from the Hacienda, we have a tiny lapel pin. It's about dime size, so it's very tiny. But this may have been either something they sold at their gift shop, or even some staff members would have lapel pins on their outfits as well. Next slide, please. Thank you.
All right, well, those were the signs that are on Las Vegas Boulevard that are part of the Scenic Byway. You take a little detour if you turn right down either Ogden, or if you're going past the Horse and Rider, I think you'd want to turn right on Carson, and then you take a left when you get to Casino Center, head on down that way, and eventually you'll run into a bus stop not far from the Bonneville Transit Center, and you'll see the wonderful sign from the 5th Street Liquor Store. This is another one of the older signs in the collection, dates to the 1940s. Emily alluded to this earlier, but you can see in the name there, 5th Street, that was Las Vegas Boulevard before it was called Las Vegas Boulevard. So I think it was around 1959 that the name changed, but they kept the name on their sign and of the business. So this sign dates to probably around 1946, maybe 1947. The business, though, was founded in May of 1945, so not long after the war in Europe ended. Gordon Potter was the owner, and he designed this sign and then had Yesco fabricate it and install it on the front of the property. It's another animated sign, so it has a kind of simple animation of a hand pouring champagne into a champagne glass. We continue to the next slide. This is after it came down. So this is kind of an important sign, not only because it's interesting aesthetically, and it was, from a fairly long-running downtown business, but it's also important for the Neon Museum's evolution. This is really the first neon sign that was saved for a future neon park or neon museum. Went out of business in 1988, and then the owners were civic-minded enough to donate it at that time to the Allied Arts Council. And that was a group of concerned citizens who set about saving historic neon when they could at that time. You can kind of consider it, in a way, kind of the precursor organization to the Neon Museum. If we want to advance to the next slide, we do have some newspaper clippings of when 5th Street Liquor was going out of business. You can see on the right there what the sign looked like when it was on the property. And on the left, that's Leon and Ray Potter, the sons of Gordon Potter, who decided to close down the business, and they were going to open a new operation on site. And you can kind of tell from the other photo there that it was, not sure if I want to say divey, but a down-to-earth, no-frills type of place, kind of neighborhood bar, and also a place you could just pick up beer on your way home after work. We want to advance to the next one. I should also mention, it's interesting, this article too mentions that for a while the family actually lived on site at the bar, behind the bar area, which I wouldn't have thought of. This is a later newspaper article that shows the sign being taken down by Yesco's crew there after it was decided, yes, it's going to be saved and given to the Allied Arts Council. So as I said, the first sign saved for a future neon park, as it says there, or neon museum. But it actually didn't become part of the Neon Museum collection officially until years later, I think in the early 2000s. So for that reason, we say that, the first sign in the Neon Museum that was lit up and part of the museum was the Hacienda sign we saw earlier. All right, if we want to head forward, get to the last sign that we're going to highlight, which is another one that we've restored and installed in conjunction with the RTC. This is going to be, if you're actually trying to take the driving tour here yourself, if you continue far down Las Vegas Boulevard and turn left onto Convention Center Drive, and then take another left onto Paradise, it is right at another bus stop, right near the brand new, pretty huge Convention Center expansion. And if we want to advance slides, as many of you may know, if you're familiar with the landmark, really the building itself might have been more memorable and noteworthy than any of the signs that were on it or nearby that were advertising for it. Not that our sign isn't cool. And I think we're not exactly sure where our sign was located on the property. It might have been near one of the entrances or porte cochere areas. And you can see the really cool futuristic space age tower there, which obviously evokes, the Seattle Space Needle, and then later, of course, what we still have in town, the Stratosphere Tower as well, now known as the Strat. And this was kind of unfortunately really a struggling property, I think, for most of its existence. Construction began on it in the early 1960s, but it didn't get completed, and it didn't even open until 1969. And that was also another property at the time that Howard Hughes owned, and he oversaw the grand opening, which they did pull off, and it went well, although there's kind of an interesting story that some people may be aware of. Howard Hughes, the eccentric guy he was a little over-invested in the planning, down to the last minute, even micromanaging the guest list. But they did pull off the opening nonetheless. But the property still kind of never really got off the ground. Originally, the people had kind of made fun of it as kind of an eyesore since it didn't get finished for a while. But it did have, a fairly good run. It closed in 1990. And then famously, after it was sold yet again to the Las Vegas Convention Center and Visitors Authority, it was imploded in 1995. And then for quite a while was just a big vacant parking area up until the recent construction. We want to advance to the next slide. Emily, we have another one of these.
Yes, another one of the cute liquor bottles. They're very, this one actually is the shape of the building compared to the Hacienda one, which was the shape of the sign. In this collection, as I mentioned, there's others like from the Stardust, Dunes, and Tropicana. Some of them do showcase their signs. Some are more of architectural features that they show. But it's interesting in Vegas that either the building itself is an interesting architectural style, or you could think of a building like Binion's that really is just a square kind of block, but it's wrapped in neon, and the sign becomes more of the recognizable trait of the building itself. So even though the building of the landmark is gone, we were very fortunate to be able to reintroduce one of the signs back pretty close to where the property was originally located. This kind of helps give a sense of Las Vegas's past and what was there and what could be there in the future. So future plans for the scenic byways, that there is a large construction project going on Las Vegas Boulevard, as you may have seen if you've driven past on it recently. Here's a current photo of some of the construction that's going on. Most of the signs will have to be removed from the byway to have this construction be completed. They're going to rebuild the medians and add in the palm trees again, and our signs hopefully in the next few years will have it all completed. So the Hacienda horse, though, is staying as our beacon of the start of the museum. And stay posted to all of our social media channels as well as our website for future plans of different signs that may be a part of the byway in the near future, as well as when these signs will be removed. So here we have just a few photos of how the gallery used to look on Fremont Street. You may recognize some of these as being in our boneyard now, such as the Chief Hotel Court sign, the flame, and the Aladdin's lamp. But many of these signs were also on 3rd Street, as you see on the left, 5th Street liquor store sign. It was a part of Neonopolis for a time, but has been moved to its current location. Did you have anything to add for that, Derek?
Yeah, most of those were moved, I guess about 10 to 12 years ago now. So, but the kind of showing you a picture of the past as we look to the future plans, since we probably have more signs put out, although it's kind of hard to say which ones at this point. It's a very complicated, costly process, and we have to work with our partners at the city, and that Las Vegas Boulevard widening project is a pretty major project right now, and that's one reason why the Lucky Cuss is not out at the moment. All right, well, I think that concludes our presentation. We are more than happy to answer any questions that came through in the Q&A or the chat.
Hi, Derek and Emily. We have a couple questions in the Q&A here. A couple questions about the silver slipper. The first one is, are there two silver slippers, one with an ankle strap and an open toe and one without?
So I think you're maybe referring to the ruby slipper that's on East Fremont in front of the El Cortez. That one is a part of a different project. It's part of the East Fremont district. It is not a part of the Neon Museum or the Scenic Byway. It was a newer sign that was just created to kind of look vintage, similar to that showgirl sign and that cocktail glass that's down there as well.
Yeah, those were fabricated, I think, I forget the company's name, but they were based in Arizona, but they were brand new signs meant to evoke vintage Vegas and, classic neon. So while they're cool, they're not historic. I think they went in like in 2007.
Mhm.
All right, next silver slipper question. Does it light up at night? Does the sign light up at night?
Yes, and it has a beautiful flashing animation, so it sparkles very beautifully.
Yeah, all of them, well, they're meant to all light up at night. They do require regular maintenance since they are still signs after all. They function. And sometimes, there's a comedic effect. Some of you might, if you're local or longtime visitors, might remember when the sign near the Hacienda, that big beer glass was a Bass Ale, the B would go out. Anyway, our Hacienda sign, suitably enough, a few years ago, right before Halloween, the head went out on the horseman, which was, just kind of funny. But yeah, we regularly have to keep an eye on them and work with sign companies in the city to make sure that they are staying on and staying lit up for everybody to enjoy.
All right, our next question. Where was the Lucky Cuss sign originally placed?
Do you mean
The original location of the sign.
Oh, so yeah, on East Fremont, right in front of the property on the address is 3305 Fremont Street. So it was close to where the Showboat Hotel used to be.
Yeah, and as Emily said, the business is actually still there today. I think they're still open. I'm not exactly sure, but they do have a similar looking sign with that cool cartoonish font. It's just not as tall as the original sign.
All right, another question coming in. I think it's regarding the Zippy comic that you guys showed that featured the Safari Motel. This question is asking, is the Safari Motel featured in that comic strip the one that was jungle themed, a casino in the late 90s, early 2000s?
So it was just a motel always. I don't believe they ever had gambling at the property. I haven't actually been into the Safari Motel myself, and haven't seen actually any historic photos of the inside of it. Derek, do you know if it was themed that way on the inside?
No, I haven't heard that. I'm not sure what it looked like inside there either. So something we might want to look into.
All right, random question about Arby's. Do you know if there are any classic Arby's signs that are still up in Las Vegas that use old lights?
I don't know about any that are still up, but I know the museum has two different Arby's signs. One is actually made of porcelain enamel, which is actually very good for preservation, since it doesn't wear off or wear down too easily compared to some other materials. We also do have a neon kind of hat as well in the North Gallery. That's not on view quite yet.
Yeah, I was going to mention the signs we have. We have some good examples of Arby's signs, but last time I drove by, and this was a while back, but there is an Arby's in North Las Vegas on Lake Mead that did seem to have an older Arby's sign, maybe the vintage of our porcelain one, but I'm not exactly sure. And I don't know if it's still functioning, but they did have kind of an older one at one point there.
All right. Do either of you know why the last frontier village closed? The Wild West Wild West theme seemed very popular during the time. So there's a question about why it would have closed.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not exactly sure. They were rebranding even before that. I think the last Frontier Village came to an end in the early '60s, I want to say, but don't quote me on that. I know we're recording this, but anyway, in '55 it became the New Frontier. So it was just kind of a change in theme of the whole area. Uh, and the Silver Slipper was kind of part, more or less, of the last Frontier Village in its original incarnation, and then was more of a standalone area. But as to why they chose to do that, I'm sure we can find an answer if you look up maybe some of the work of like Michael Green from UNLV or somebody like that. They may have written about it. But yeah, good question. One that we'll have to jot down for our own interest as well.
And with the theming, what's kind of interesting is the connection between pop culture, particularly movies and music, and Las Vegas. Like in the 40s and 50s, like old westerns were kind of popular, and then into the space age in the 1960s. That's kind of when the transition into the new frontier took place, kind of with more of a futuristic design to their sign, even compared to the Old West font that the last frontier used as well.
All right, it looks like the Hacienda Horse and Rider was off the other night when a gentleman drove past. Do you know if that's due to construction?
I'm not too sure, but we'll look into it. So thank you for letting us know.
All right. Here's a great question. Are there any new properties like Circa or Resorts World using neon? Do you work with property owners to encourage neon?
I think for the most part, no, they're not really using neon on at least their big, eye-catching signs. It's mostly LED and video screen type stuff. I think though on Circa, part of the building, it looked like they had, and I don't know for sure, it looks like they had something that even if it wasn't neon, it looked like neon and behaved like neon. But we usually don't have direct involvement with property owners who are opening up new businesses. Of course, we're happy when historic neon is saved and reused or repurposed. You mentioned Circa, so inside Circa is Vegas Vicky from 1980, which we're glad that is now back out for people to enjoy. Well, I guess it's not outside; it's inside in its new little bar area. Yeah, I'm trying to think even of other examples, but like I said, for the most part, a lot of the newer signs are not really using neon. That doesn't mean they're not cool. Don't want to bag on LED. In fact, like if you haven't seen the Caesars Forum Shop sign that was installed a few years ago, that is really impressive use of new technology. And then of course, Resorts World is also gigantic.
Here's another question. Do you know if the city of Las Vegas has any plans to install more restored signs throughout the city?
So there are plans to expand the byways. Most of the signs that will be going up in the next few years will be all along Las Vegas Boulevard. There are locations chosen out already, mostly in front of the courthouse, actually, more south on Las Vegas Boulevard, to have more signs put in, which is very exciting.
All right, Claudia is asking if there are historic neon signs in Las Vegas and the surrounding areas, is there a requirement for them to notify either the city or the Neon Museum before being closed down or torn down?
Not really. Nothing that has a lot of teeth to it anyway. I think there is an ordinance on part of downtown on Las Vegas Boulevard that businesses were supposed to use neon in their signage. But as far as do they have to let us know or give permission or anything before something is torn down, that probably should be a consideration as far as the city goes, but we are a private nonprofit, and we can't really do anything about what a business owner wants to do. It's an interesting question, though, since even some of the signs that we have in the collection, like the Green Shack sign, for example, in the Boneyard, that was even listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but the business owner, people who bought it out anyway later on, did tear it down. There's nothing really we could do about that.
All right, question coming in from MB. What parts of the Tim Burton exhibit will remain as permanent fixtures inside the Neon Boneyard?
So currently we have the keystone piece of the exhibit, which is the Las Vegas sign tower that is shaped like the dunes sign shape and has some features of little stardust stars kind of on it. We also have the neon piece called the grid wall, which is inspired by Tim Burton's earlier days of coming to Las Vegas and the dunes as well. We also have the Beetlejuice sign, as well as a piece called Guns and Booze, which are one's in the Boneyard, the other one is currently in the store exhibit space.
All right, and Jeremiah is asking if somebody can speak to the Neon Museum expansion. Are there any developments that we can share?
Well, I don't really have a lot of specific info that I could talk about, but yeah, just stay tuned. We are planning to utilize the former Reed Whipple building, and I think that project, obviously the crisis we're still in impacted that a little bit, but we're still planning to move forward with that. So hopefully within the next, year or so, you'll see some real action on that front.
All right, Laura is asking how many neon museums are in the US, and do we have a partnership or relationship with the one in Glendale, California?
There are quite a few neon museums now. There are many arising around the nation, which is very exciting. Currently, we do not have any projects going on at the Museum of Neon Art in Glendale, though hopefully in the future we would like to partnership with them.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how many neon museums there are now in the US. There are several, including out east as well, starting up, or at least have been in the creation for a while. And it's really international too. So off the top of my head, I don't have a number, but there also is stuff going on in Canada, as well as in Asia and in Poland and Warsaw.
All right, here's a great question. All of the ephemera and collectibles that were shown during the presentation, are those available anywhere for viewing? Are they on exhibit?
Currently, we do not have an exhibit of the ephemera pieces. Hopefully in the future, we'll have more indoor space, such as at Reed Whipple, where we can have more exhibits showing those pieces. We do have a few upcoming smaller exhibits in the La Concha lobby, so stay posted to our social media channels for that coming up soon. But hopefully we do also want to do like an online kind of exhibit with them, hopefully eventually as well.
All right, you two, any thoughts about the new Las Vegas sign on Las Vegas Boulevard next to the Strat that was installed by the city of Las Vegas?
I think it's beautiful. I really like the light bulbs actually on it. They used it kind of like frosted light bulbs on it. They look kind of like incandescent, but I believe they actually are LED lights. So it is interesting how they incorporated the vintage style, but it is a modern sign, similar to those signs on East Fremont that we were mentioning earlier, like that ruby slipper.
Yeah, actually, I ended up liking the sign more than I thought I would. I drove by it recently at night, and the arches lit up are actually pretty cool.
Do either of you know if Christian Louboutin got his inspiration from the Silver Slipper?
I'm not too sure. There may have been some inspiration, but I'm not too familiar if it was directly related.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one either.
The Pabst Blue Ribbon neon sign that's near the El Cortez, is that a vintage sign or a new one?
It is a newer sign. The sign actually was donated to the museum about a year ago now, in March of 2020. Yeah, so it was the Pabst Blue Ribbon Cool Blue character. It's a vintage character that the company has used for most of its history, actually. But the PBR wanted to kind of have it a little park in that area to have advertisement. They also paired with the park restaurant that's there. I don't know if I have anything else to add to that right now.
Do you guys know how many properties Howard Hughes owned in total?
I forget the number, but I can list them off. So it was Desert Inn, Sands, Silver Slipper, Frontier, Landmark. I think I'm missing one. He almost bought the Stardust. We were talking about that the other day. Yes.
Yeah, he wasn't allowed to by the federal government.
Did I miss any there, Derek?
Did you say the Sands?
Maybe not. So I can't remember how many properties that was.
All right, and last question for this evening. Will this presentation be available in the future?
Yes.
Yeah, we will share the recording at a later date, and we hope to do more online programs like this, highlighting other aspects of the collection and the museum and Las Vegas history.
Yeah, also on our website, we do have a few really cool options to kind of peruse around on. We have a 360 virtual tour of the Neon Boneyard that's there, as well as Victor Ahika Menor's Artists in Residence Open Studio is available online for free as well.
Yeah, and if you all have any ideas or things you'd like to see us cover, feel free to contact us.
Yes, and
there on the screen.
Yeah, and we would like to thank our partners in the Scenic Byway, the City of Las Vegas, particularly the Commission for the Las Vegas Centennial, as well as the Regional Transportation Center. Thank you guys very much for allowing us to have a space to introduce neon back into the Las Vegas landscape. And thank you all for attending today. We know it's getting a little late now, right, in the presentation. So thank you for hanging with us this whole time. Yeah, please feel free to forward any questions to us. And we hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.